Introducing Captain Eric Peterson, who will describe our Delmarva Circumnavigation Training Cruise program, where we have completed more than 70 such cruises over the past 20 years.
The title of this presentation again is, Circumnavigating the Delmarva Peninsula, and it's really it's a stepping stone cruise, a first step towards doing your ocean sailing. It's a great experience doing on your own or with the school, obviously, to go find out what it's all about, and that's really how this presentation is aimed, getting ready for it and actually doing that trip. ASA has a very definitive definition of what the ASA 106 is. It says, I can read it, but you can read it too, but able to safely act as a skipper of a vessel 30 to 50 feet in length, day and nighttime standard in coastal and inland water in any weather. Of course, when you take a class, you can't guarantee what the weather is going to be, but the training is set up to try to get you prepared for whatever that weather might come along, no matter what it is. And it really, like I said, in my words, is an introductory class to ocean sailing that includes most, maybe not quite all, but most of the preparation that you would do for going through a true ocean voyage, but it's limited in the context of a coastal sailing and shorter passages. So very quickly, what that means is if you set off to go to Bermuda, you've got a 5-day trip typically, maybe 4 days if you got a really fast boat, and whatever happens to you a day and a half out of port, you better be able to take care of on your own by yourself with no help from anybody on the outside world, because there's nobody out there to help you. You need to know how to do things to your engine, repair things on your boat, jury rig things, get by, and you also need to know how to contact people in case of emergencies. When you're on a coastal passage, usually, even in the worst conditions, you're probably no more than 24 hours away from a port, and most of the time, way closer than that. So, it's a matter of self-sufficiency that separates the coastal cruising from true ocean passages. So, brief resume on myself, as Rita talked about a few moments ago. Yes, Master 50 Ton, been working, I am a graduate of the Maryland School, I'm an ASA certified instructor. I've logged about 46,000 miles over my lifetime on sailboats. Most all of that is offshore sailing. I've been teaching for the Maryland School, as she says, quite a while. I do own an Island Packet 35, vintage 1991. And my wife and I lived aboard and cruised on that boat from 1998 up through most of the period through 2005. And in that case, we sailed the U.S. East Coast from Florida up to Maine. We visited the Bahamas a couple of times. We made 2 round trips to the Eastern Caribbean, as far south as Trinidad. And then we ended up crossing the Atlantic over to the Azores, to Madeira and the Canary Islands. Long story why we never made it to mainland Europe, but we had just a fantastic trip. So anyway, that's just a little bit about where I come from as I'm sitting down here with you guys trying to go through this presentation today. I've broken up the whole process here in this presentation, and actually the work of doing one of these trips, and again it's set out as if you were doing this on your own independently. But this is, again, the same structure that you would go through with myself or any other instructor in doing a 106 class. And I start off with saying that planning is the #1 step, and the most important part of the whole thing. I mean, everybody talks about doing a trip like this, and you jump instantly to the actual voyage down here in the underway routines. But really, you need to start back up here at the planning part, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. Then after we finally got everything planned, then when it gets closer to the time for the trip, we begin the actual voyage preparation. And once we've done the preparation, then finally we get underway. So, the planning part, if you're doing this on your own, can start any time, well in advance of the trip you're going to take. To do these things, you want to select the itinerary. In this case, we've already selected it. We know what we're doing. We're going to circumnavigate the Delmarva. But there's lots of other itineraries you could pick. Once you've done that, you're going to have to do your preliminary navigation planning. You're going to make sure you know how many miles it is, etc. You're going to have to choose the calendar what time of year are you going to do this, what schedule are you going to try to do it on, and be very cautious with your schedule. I see more people get in trouble on ocean passages where their passage is very tightly dictated by their schedule, and they end up having to leave in conditions that they wouldn't normally want to leave in because of their schedule. So try to make sure that's taken care of up front. Learning your weather sources. Where are you going to get the information for weather when you're out there in the ocean? Where's it going to come from? Then you need to select and equip the boat, and then you need to select a crew. So we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail. Itinerary. Again, I said we've already selected it for this. This is the Delmarva Peninsula. This is typically what I personally do when I hold this course. Other people may do very similar things, maybe slightly different, but my routine is we start off here in Rock Hall, and then we go up the bay the first day to the C&D Canal and pull into a marina up there. And I usually use that day as a shakedown trip, and I think that's a good thing to plan in any kind of routine. Is you need a nice day to get the shake down the boat and shake down the crew, get everybody used to the boat, used to working together, and used to the routines, and in a non-stressful environment. So this usually turns out to be a nice sail up the bay to the C&D Canal, and from the C&D Canal, finally, we do our final preparations, our final weather checks, and we head off down the bay all the way to Norfolk. And this is typically somewhere around 200 nautical mile trip, which means it takes 18, 20 hours depending on how fast you're going and how the wind is, etc. So I say 18 to 20. It takes about 30 hours, right? You're going to take, if we leave here at noon, for example, out of the C&D, we're going to have nightfall somewhere around here when we're going past Cape Penelope. Sun's going to come up as we're going on down the shore, okay? And about the time we're getting near Norfolk, it's going to set again, and you're going to end up entering the port of Norfolk at night. And again, that's a school thing that I do with my classes, is to, if it works out right, is to enter the port at night. When my wife and I always did these things together, we would go to extraordinary means to try to plan our arrivals where we weren't arriving at night. But again, from a long ocean passage, you can't control that either. But anyway, so that's generally the outline of the routine we'll follow. And so now we've chosen our route. We've done, and our preliminary navigation planning involves several things. We need to look at ocean pilot charts, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute, to try to look at weather conditions and wind conditions. We're going to look at ocean navigational charts for plotting our courses. We're going to look at departure and arrival charts of the ports that we are departing from and arriving in. We're going to make sure we've got charts on alternate ports. If we're doing the Delmarva, what are our alternate ports? Well, there's only two of them. There's Ocean City and there's Chincoteague. And we're going to read up about those in our various and sundry publications, cruising guides and coast pilots, etc. We're going to look at light list. You get a Coast Pilot, a very important book, I think. It's going to help us in a lot of ways. And we're going to get cruising guides that are applicable to us. There's a lot of local knowledge and interesting information in commercial cruising guides on the market. We're going to make sure our compass is working, our distance log is working, and our depth sounder is working. We're going to have a GPS, and we're going to have some log books. So that's the stuff that we've got to use to get ourselves started. And then it's going to help us make these choices about the calendar and the schedule. So that's the next thing we've got to do, having done all of this preliminary work and reviewing all of this data. We get into trying to choose a schedule. And to look at the calendar, what time of year are we going to make this trip? Again, we do this with the school, and we're hemmed in by a lot of other outside constraints, as well as you would be when you're doing this on your own. But you certainly want to understand the climate data that's related to your trip, and pick, if to the best of your ability, when is the best time to be taking this particular voyage. And coast pilots are one very excellent source. For ocean trips, there's another source called Jimmy Cornell's World Cruising Guide, and there's probably others out there as well, but that's one that I found to be very useful. But again, it's not going to be very helpful to you in this trip because we're sticking to the coast. But we're going to look at the coast pilot to get some information on climate, and we're going to look at pilot charts. And again, like I said, reemphasize again the schedule choices. Make sure that we've got sufficient time in your schedule for proper pre-departure preparation and to allow for unexpected weather delays. And I can't overstate that enough. It is so nice to be sitting there in port and thinking, okay, the weather's not too great. We don't want to leave on this trip down to Delaware Bay right now because it's blowing like crazy out there, and we want to wait a day. And as long as you've got the flexibility to wait a day, then you can do that. So it makes for a lot more pleasant experience for everybody that's involved. Okay, here's an excerpt from the Coast Pilot, and I'm not sure how much of this you guys can all read out there, but right here where my cursor is, it describes the weather. This whole thing is titled Weather. Sorry about that. Weather up here. And down here it describes the weather in the summer. And it says, except for the threat of thunderstorms and a rare tropical cyclone, summer brings good sailing weather. Winds are out of the south and southwest most of the time, et cetera, et cetera. So, they're saying that, this is a good time of year to do this, is in the summer. And if you want to do it, spring brings milder conditions than winter. Well, that sort of didn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But it still says gales and wind speeds of 28 knots or more occur about half as frequently as they did in the winter, but they still occur. So, you can get a flavor for the weather conditions that you might expect when you leave and to do this trip in, say, the springtime. Then let's look at a pilot chart. And again, pilot charts are really aimed, as you can tell by this picture, the whole North Atlantic. There's one for the North Atlantic. There's one for the South Atlantic. There's all different pilot charts of the world, but they're aimed at the whole huge ocean. But they're still useful, and I'll show you you'll see more on what a pilot chart does here when I go to the next screen. They break up the entire ocean into quadrants, and in each of these quadrants they have a windrose, what this is called right here. And you look at, here's one right off the coast of the Delmarva Peninsula. So what is it telling us? And this is for, I believe, the month of June or July. Hang on a second. Yeah, this is June. That's what I thought. This is for the month of June. So it says in the month of June, the winds, the majority of the time, you see this the length of this line represents the percentage of times the wind blows from that direction. So the most dominant wind direction in June is from the southwest. Second most dominant wind direction is from the south. And maybe the third most is probably from the west. So you can get a flavor for where the wind is going to blow from the most often, and then you look at the number of little barbs on these wind arrows, and there looks like 4 in most cases. Over here there's only 3 little barbs on that one kind of the southeast. And what that means is they're giving you the average wind speed in Beaufort. Now you've known about Beaufort scale, most of you have for quite a while, but you've never had any kind of practical use for it before. Here's a real practical use. You need to know what the Beaufort scale is, because what you find out is force 4 is 11 to 16 knots. So that's a nice breeze. It's unfortunately, if you're going around the Delmarva in the direction we do, that's probably going to be on your nose. You could choose to do it the other way around. The school does it this way for a lot of instructional reasons. But at any rate, this picture does give you a view of how much wind you might expect. And the number in the middle is how calm, the percentage of days when the wind is calm. In this case, in the month of June, it's 4% of the time that the winds are calm. Lastly, you have all these little bluish-green kind of turquoise lines here. These are currents. So you can also look on this chart and find out that going down the Delmarva Peninsula the way we're going to do it is in June, the currents are mostly going north to south. So that's going to be favorable for us as we're going down the coast. So a lot of other information on here on a pilot chart for planning more significant ocean passages. You can look at the time that you have, the percentage of time that gales exist in certain quadrants in the ocean, where the limits of ice are, where the limits of waves exceeding 12 feet, etc. So there's a lot of data on there. But for this trip, this is what we're most interested in. Then we need to learn about radios, where we get weather sources. The most predominant one that people sailing around the bay are going to be familiar with are VHF radio. You turn it on, you go to your weather station that you listen to all the time, and you find out what the marine weather is for the Chesapeake Bay or wherever else you're sailing. The difference is on this trip we're going to leave the bay, we're going to go down the Delaware Bay, we're going to go out into the ocean and back in at Norfolk. So one of the things we're going to have to do is locate those other weather stations so we know what station to tune into to get the weather for the part of the ocean that we're sailing in, and even the coastal weather as well as the offshore weather. Understanding that local forecasts are typically for near coastal situations which are valid up to 20 nautical miles offshore normally. That's typically well within the range of what we might run this trip on, but we might go out beyond that. And as we're running down the coast of the Delmarva Peninsula, we run into areas where you can't get very good reception of any VHF station for some periods of time. So there is another source, and it's the single sideband radio if you happen to have one on your boat. And you can listen to that on various frequencies, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But the catch is, as opposed to this one, which is a continuous broadcast on VHF, this comes in once every 6 hours. So you have to know exactly when it's coming up, and you have to go turn the radio on and listen with your undivided attention, because if you miss it, you got to wait for 6 hours for the forecast to come back again. But it does cover the Atlantic offshore weather out to 200 and 250 nautical miles offshore. So it's another important piece of weather information or source. If your boat happens to have something called Navtex, which not everybody does, but it's a great device. This is a worldwide continuous broadcast system that broadcasts all sorts of notices to mariners of all various hazards and conditions and buoy status, just local notices to mariners that you might get otherwise. It also gives you weather reports. It gives you weather reports in English the world over, English being the official language of the sea. So you get weather reports everywhere in English. We had this when we crossed the Atlantic and found it to be very, very helpful to us. And again, it broadcasts not everywhere in the ocean, but it certainly reaches out for long distances, hundreds of miles offshore. Typically, you can still pick this up. When you get into foreign countries, they're broadcasting in English, but by the way, but they're also giving you forecast in Beaufort scale. They don't give it to you in knots for the wind speed. So again, you got to go know your Beaufort scale. Sometimes you can have a boat that has satellite communication systems on it. Celestial, which is the boat the school is using for most of these classes nowadays, does have something called SkyMate, which allows you to get with your computer, download information from SkyMate, which is a direct relay of the NOAA weather forecast that you can pick up off the internet, which is a great opening. The next one is the internet, various resources off the National Weather Service site. It's a very, very excellent site, the NOAA weather site, and you need to spend time on that, studying that before you leave so you understand what's out there. And I'll show you a little bit more about that, because that studying that will also help you better understand the forecast you're picking up on the VHF as well as the forecast you're picking up on the single sideband. These are, I won't go down all of these. These are all the various different weather sites that I think are very, very important, very helpful. But again, you just, go to weather.noaa.gov, http weather.noaa.gov, and that'll get you started into all of this all of this, and you can spend hours on this site, but it's worth your while to understand it. One of the things you find when you go onto the site, you do weather.noaa.gov, and you ask for marine forecast, and you ask for local or for coastal forecast, and then you ask for a graphic interface. And this is the graphic interface that the website will bring up. And it really tells you very, very clearly and easily understandable pictures here of where these weather forecasts apply. You just click on the area you're interested in, and it takes you down into those particular forecasts. So each one of these blocks is a different, is a separate forecast provided by NOAA for the coastal waters. Then here's the offshore waters forecast. I said these come in on single sideband. A lot of the coastal VHF stations will also broadcast this as you're in the offshore areas there that you can pick up. Not all of them do, and it's not as consistent. But single sideband always broadcasts these. You can typically also pick these up on your Navtex. Again, it's every 6 hours. You can also get it on the internet. And then I said before, you need to find out where the stations are that you're going to be listened to of the VHF stations, because VHF stations typically are limited in their range, maybe about a 50-mile transmission, but it's about as far as they reach, because it's a line of sight, straight line propagation. It doesn't bounce off the atmosphere like shortwave signals from your single sideband. So it's like a TV signal. It runs out and eventually gets too high to be received by you on your boat. So you can go into the internet and you can track all of these different stations down out of that NOAA site, and you can find this is one example. This is the station in Salisbury, Maryland, and it shows you within the white range where you can get good reception, within the green area where the reception is more spotty, and beyond the green you can't pick up this station. So you know that as you come up the Delaware Bay through the C&D Canal, as you start down the Delaware Bay, somewhere in here you're going to start picking up Salisbury, and you can listen to Salisbury for quite a while, but somewhere down in here you're going to lose it, and you'll need to find another station. So if you do this research on each one of the stations along the route, where next one's probably going to be Norfolk, you can find out where it is that you'll be able to start picking up Norfolk. And then you can make yourself a piece of paper that tells you what stations to listen to in what particular areas. Also off the internet, as well as out of your Coast Pilots, you can find out when the single sideband weather forecast or broadcast that you can pick up on your single sideband radio. They come in, they're actually all done in universal time, which you have to translate into either Eastern Daylight or Eastern Standard for the case of this Delmarva trip. And they vary, the frequencies vary depending on the time of day, because again, propagation for single sideband frequencies, because it's dependent upon bouncing those frequencies, those radio transmissions off the atmosphere and back down to the ground level, they vary depending on the ionization in the atmosphere by time of day. So they broadcast at different frequencies for the different times of day. So you can get this information right off of, I said, out of the Coast Pilot and lots of other places. But again, this is just part of your getting ready to make sure you know when this is. And then if you've got a single sideband on your boat, go out and sit there in the marina and tune it in and see if you can hear it and get familiar with what it sounds like. And I really recommend, when you're listening to this, is to record it. On whatever device you have for recording on, make a recording of it. It gets around the problem of failing to understand what they said, or failing to write fast enough when you're trying to write all this down. If you just go ahead and record it, you can make your notes as best you can, and then when it's all over, you can come back and listen to the pieces that you missed very carefully over and over again to make sure you understand properly what they're talking about. Very good tool in the process of analyzing and utilizing this as an information source. Okay. As long as we're talking about weather, I just want to do a little sidebar on offshore weather. all the trips that I've taken offshore, my wife and I have taken, and as well as I've had with classes, you talk to people about this, and almost universally the first question they ever ask you is well, what's the worst weather you ever were in? And I always want to ask them, why don't you ask me what's the best weather I was ever in? Because I've had some really, really nice sailing offshore. But nevertheless, that's what they ask, because that's what they're worried about. Okay, and so a few words. First, I would like to say that severe weather is rare, parentheses, with careful planning, but you have to be prepared. When my wife and I did our trip from Bermuda to the Azores, I spent a lot of time researching the weather through various sources, including Jimmy Cornell's World Cruising Guide, talking to every other person I could ever find that had ever done that trip, and figure out when the best time of year was to make it. Everything seemed to say June. So guess what time of year we went? We went in June. It's just, to me, it's just common sense to do that kind of stuff. Anyway, so if you properly plan things and you're lucky, you won't get caught in anything like this. My experience in about 45,000 miles of sailing, as I've said before, is, what's the percentage of time we got into winds up, I say over 40 knots, even close to 40 knots. And I would say it's 1 to 2%, and that may be overstated a bit. So it's not very often that this happens, but it does happen. So you choose your season wisely. You choose your departure forecast wisely. Okay, but you still had to be prepared. Then we've got to get down to selecting and equipping the boat. Presumably you already own this boat, but sometimes it may be you and a group of friends are going to get together and do this, and you want to decide, if you both have boats, which boat are you going to take? In the case of the school, we have Celestial that we're doing these classes on right now. She's an IP 440. Very solid, dependable offshore boat. So what kind of boat should you need? Well, you need something, and again, this is highly opinionated. You'll get a lot of different views from different people about this, but you need something 35 feet or larger. And there's 35-foot boats, and there's other 35-foot boats, and some are going to be better for ocean sailing than others. My Island Packet 35 I was always totally confident in, and we've never had a problem where we felt the boat was not up to the task. It needs to be a strong hull, deck, cabin, hatches, port lights, all that stuff. You have to imagine crashing waves coming down on top of your boat and what they may or may not do to it. You need to have a recent survey and all the appropriate corrections done to it. You need to inspect your sails. You can go hang around the bay and you can sail for years on sails that are virtually rotten, and never had a bit of a problem. And if they do tear, big deal. You just turn on your motor and motor back to the marina and call the sail maker, and he comes and fixes it. Again, you're dealing with slightly different conditions here, so you need to make sure you've got everything done on that score before you leave, and they need to be in good shape. Some desirable stuff, not absolutely mandatory, desirable stuff depending on the weather, is a whisker pole. If you end up with a lot of downwind sailing, it would be nice to pole out your Genoa and hold it in place. You find out when you get offshore that the conditions that you've been sailing on the bay with nice flat water, that when you get offshore and you've got waves, not huge waves, but the boat is rolling more, that things like keeping the Genoa out for going downwind are much, much more difficult than it would have been on the bay. So whisker pole becomes really nice. Spare halyards. What if your main halyard lets loose, or it chafes, or it rubs on something, and something you didn't predict, didn't see coming, and it happens? If you've got a spare one on the boat, problem's trivial. You just hook up the spare halyard and hoist the main back up to the top of the mast again. So really, really important thing to have for any boat that's doing any significant offshore sailing. A cruising spinnaker might be nice if the winds go really light on you. It's going to be a lot more fun if they're going light and downwind. It's going to be a lot more fun to sail with the spinnaker than it is to try to do wing on wing in the seas with the boat pitching back and forth. A storm trysail is also very desirable for a trip like this. I would go further. For a true offshore ocean trip, it's absolutely mandatory but it's very desirable for a trip like this in the eventuality that you got caught in some unexpected, really high winds that you didn't plan on. Very important thing to have is standing rigging that is less than 10 years old. You don't want to run the risk of losing a shroud, a head stay, a back stay, or whatever. And then lastly, in the most extreme situation where you have to head for a port because of really severe weather, you want to make sure you got appropriate ground tackle so that you can safely anchor in wherever you have to end up ducking into to get out of the weather. So, a lot of equipment. More on the boat for equipment, however, is you need sea berths with lee cloths, and that's something you never needed on the Chesapeake Bay or any other inland water. Well, what's a sea berth with a lee cloth? Well, a sea berth with a lee cloth is where you can go to sleep. A lee cloth is what's going to hold you on that berth so that you don't fall out when you're laying there asleep. Depending on your crew, typically one of the best berths on the boat is going to be the aft cabin, the quarter berth back there. That's going to be a nice sleeping spot, but that's only for one person. And depending on the configuration of your quarter berth, you're going to have more people than that on the boat. You've got to have a couple of people sleeping in the salon, and they're going to sleep on those little settees, one on each side of the salon, and the boat pitches around, and you're going to have the risk of falling off, especially if you're on the windward side, the uphill side. You're definitely going to fall off. So a lee cloth is just a cloth that stretches from that berth up to, in the case on the Island Packets, tied to the overhead handholds, so that it just holds you in place so you can't fall out. Allows you to get a good, comfortable sleep when you're off watch. You need to make sure your electronics are working. I think I said that earlier. You really ought to have a radar, if you possibly can, for spotting offshore traffic. Chart plotter is nice, but you'll find that if you come along with me on a school trip, I rarely allow it to be turned on. I do things the old-fashioned way because I think then you earn a better respect for the chart plotter. But I understand the real world, and everybody has chart plotters on their boats nowadays. And then autopilot, particularly if you're sailing like my wife and I did a lot with just two of us, autopilot becomes an absolutely essential piece of gear, not just a nice to have. It's essential if you're going to sail short-handed. If you're going to sail with 4 or 5 folks, it's not important at all. So it depends upon how big of a crew you're going to have on your boat. We actually, on my boat, I rigged it with the main autopilot and a backup autopilot. I was so fixated with the importance of the autopilot on the boat. For communications, again, you definitely have to have a good VHF radio. As I've said before, a single sideband is desirable. A sat phone or a satellite system like we talked about is also desirable. And then you absolutely must have paper charts and publications, including alternate ports. I don't care how many chart plotters and how many, plotting GPS, handheld GPSs with chart plotters built in you have. I don't care. You need absolute paper charts on your boat when all else fails. Then safety and emergency stuff. Oh my God, look at this list. And again, this is all part of planning your trip and getting yourself organized and making sure you have all the gear and preparations that you need before you even get to the boat. You need flares on your boat. You need good offshore handheld flares and parachute flares, not those little $39.95 3 by 4 inch orange plastic thing that you buy from West Marine to satisfy the Coast Guard when they board you and say, yeah, where's your flares? And you say, here they are, all 3 of them. You need something a lot more than that if you're going to go offshore. You definitely ought to have an EPIRB. That's for notifying the Coast Guard when your boat is in serious trouble. Electronic position indicating radio beacon. Now GPIRBs are the common thing. They send an absolute latitude and longitude out to the Coast Guard. You need Type 1 life jackets. You need a life raft. Go rent one. There are lots of places that rent them. You have to have a man overboard horseshoe, pole, and strobe, or a man overboard module. Some way so that if perished the thought somebody did actually go overboard, the pole that we used to be fairly commonplace on a lot of boats is basically to get a flag something that's floating in the water near where the person went overboard that's about 8 feet high so that you can see where that spot was. You throw it over as soon as the person falls over so that you can get back to them and find them. A MOM is a man overboard module. That's a much more expensive way to solve the problem, but it's very, very easy and quick, and automatically deploys by just pulling a pin. You need a life sling and a throw rope so that you can throw a line to somebody to get them back to the boat. Then, most important, in negating the need for all this man overboard stuff, is you need jack lines and harnesses and personal strokes for everybody on your crew. You need jack lines that run from the bow to stern of your boat. You need harnesses that people know how to use and actually do use when and if they ever have to leave the cockpit to do anything. And if you do the jack lines and harnesses properly, you will never have to worry about man overboard. You need extra fire extinguishers. The Coast Guard requires you to have 2 on a boat this size. Excuse me. I would have probably at least 4, maybe 5. And I would go around the boat and think about where my fire extinguishers are and where I might be when I discover the fire. So it's not any good to have the fire extinguisher at the galley when I'm going to be sleeping in the V-berth forward and I don't have a fire extinguisher in the V-berth forward. How am I going to get to the galley fire if I have to get into the galley to get the extinguisher? So I need one in the V-berth. And it's just that kind of thought process. Make sure they're positioned properly around the boat. I need to have a backup manual bilge pump. If your boat's like mine is, which is the way Island Packet built it, it's got an electric bilge pump. It's got a manual bilge pump built into the boat for if the electric one doesn't work. And then you need yet another manual bilge pump that you can have on your boat that you can use in case of emergency. It's a redundancy, triple redundancy if you would, but it can't be too much redundancy when you're going offshore. You need a rigging cutter that perish the thought you did lose some of your rigging, and if you lost the mast, you don't want the mast to be hanging on the side of the boat, pounding holes into the hull. You want to be able to cut it loose and get rid of it, and to do that, you're going to have a significant tool to be able to cut through that rigging. You need a very well-stocked toolkit, not just a little thing you bought at True Value in a little plastic deal again. You need an excellent toolkit that you know how to use to do all the repairs that you can think of that you might have to do. Having some emergency navigation lights, battery-powered navigation lights. Suppose for some reason your navigation lights went out. It would really be nice to have an emergency light that runs on a little battery power that you could take out there and lash down to your bow pulpit so that you still have lights and still can be seen. And you need sail repair kit and materials. You'll need spare winch handles, at least one. You need an emergency tiller. You need a searchlight. Very excellent device for lots of things. We can use it to locate where the buoys are when you're looking for buoys at nighttime. I have used it before to shine it on my sail when I was communicating with a ship that couldn't see me. For whatever reason, he couldn't see me, probably because he was coming right towards me and he couldn't see past the bow of his big ship that was about 3 miles away. And the only way he finally saw us is when we shone the light of our searchlight on our sails, and then he saw us. I don't know what was wrong with his radar, by the way. Anyway, and then lastly, you need bosun's chair, fins, and mask. Again, this is all for extreme situations, but you hope you never use 90% of this stuff, but you really want it on there. And once you've equipped your boat properly with all this gear, then you leave with a feeling of confidence that you're ready, and it's great to have that feeling of confidence. Not quite through yet with my emergency list equipment, because now we also need a medical kit, and which brings up another subject, which says the captain really ought to be trained in CPR and first aid. As a licensed captain, I have to maintain my Red Cross certification for my license to be valid. But for taking up, paying passengers. But if you're not taking up paying passengers, you're doing this on your own. but you still ought to be ready with this, with a first aid kit on your boat, and know how to use it, and know how to contact the Coast Guard. Know where the various stations are. They're in the Coast Pilot, and know how to hail them. Same thing with your single sideband if you're going to be farther offshore, and understand these frequencies which Coast Guard monitors, and have all that information compiled and readily available beforehand. Then you need to select the crew. Skipper needs to be in good health and seasick resistant, hopefully good sailing skills, has appropriate experience, knows how to repair things. We've talked about this already coming through this presentation so far, and is ready to be the leader and organize things and make the decisions necessary. So what do you expect of the crew that you want to go out and recruit to sail with you? Well, you want them to have experience in boats over 30 feet, and the school is going to require similar kinds of things of the crew if you sign up to do this class. You need to be physically capable. And by the way, for you prospective captains, you need to have some information on these people about their medical conditions and or medications that they're taking if something were to happen and the Coast Guard, that person became very ill or whatever. You're on the radio trying to talk to somebody about what to do, and they're going to ask you these kinds of questions. So it's better to collect that information before you leave. But really, you're just looking for your crew, besides these things, just to have some basic knowledge of sailing, some good, solid basic knowledge, because the skipper's one that's going to be really in charge. And as long as you're talking about basic knowledge, what are the things you want to go over with your crew before you actually get going, or maybe you want to consider this when you're trying to select who's you're going to put on this boat, is you need to, what do they know about man overboard maneuvers? I teach, when I teach man overboard maneuvers, a quick stop maneuver. There's lots of reference material that's in the Annapolis Book of Seamanship and other sources, but understand this maneuver, try it out on your boat yourself, and so you can explain this to your crew. Be ready to talk to them about rules of the road. You cannot assume just because somebody's been sailing for 10 years that they understand the rules of the road. I have had too many experiences of that with students that seemingly should know the rules of the road that don't always know the rules of the road. And so I found that it's way better to have a little review session before you leave about what are the rules, who's to stand on, who's a giveaway vessel in various conditions, and do that before you leave and get everybody on the same page. Particularly important when you got somebody that's a great club racer at his yacht club, and they get really confused about their racing rules versus the true Coast Guard rules of the road, because they are not the same thing. And then you want them to be able to identify lights at nighttime. We're going to be sailing at night. You're going to see ships out there at night, and you want to be able to know what those lights are. What does that mean? What is that telling you about the ship? You're probably not going to get them to all memorize this before they get on the boat, and you may not even ever memorize it all before you get on the boat. So you can go down to West Marine or lots of other places, which I kept on my boat. This is a copy of a part of it, and it's just a quick and easy plastic card that references that you can go look at and say, what are these lights? What is this stuff telling me when I see that particular combination of lights? So very important thing to have your crew ready with. So we did all of this part of this presentation so far, and now we're finally down here we've actually gotten to the point where we're day one and we're in port and we're preparing. This was all just the upfront planning so far. And so here we are, just a nice snapshot of the boat in the marina in Rock Hall as everybody arrives to start getting ready. So we're doing the in-port preparation, the final voyage preparation. And here what we have to do is organize the crew. We got to, what are the different people, what are their jobs going to be? We have to inspect the boat and make sure everybody's oriented to the boat. We have to plan our meals and do our provisioning. We have to do our final navigation preparation. Right, this is down to the detail level that we might not have done before. Right, you're down to the detailed navigational planning. File a float plan with somebody. If you're not familiar with what a float plan is, it's just a simple report that basically describes the boat provides the necessary information on to the Coast Guard, or what the Coast Guard might need if they're trying to locate you, what the names and addresses and the contact information is of all the people that are on board, and you just leave that with somebody, as the book says, leave it with somebody who cares whether you ever come back again or not, and have them, they're the person that's going to contact the Coast Guard if they don't hear from you in an agreed upon length of time. And then lastly, you want to check the final weather. So those are the things we got to do still before we leave. So organize the crew. We want to make duty assignments. We want to set a watch system, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about duty assignments. Establish some watch duties. Come up with our logbook entry and procedures that we're going to follow. Make our emergency assignments. Set standing orders and set safety rules. So we're going to talk about each one of those. Duty assignments. Again, this is a school's way of doing things. You may choose to do something different, but I would just recommend that you choose to do something like this, that people know what their jobs are, and everybody understands it before you leave. That way stuff doesn't get left on the floor with everybody thinking somebody else was doing it and nobody's actually taking care of that particular problem. So obviously the captain is in charge, the final decision maker. He's going to be responsible for all the sailing and routing strategies, the safety of the crew, etc. Then you've got a navigator. You've got to have somebody who's planning the route, who's tracking where you are, who's getting all the weather updates, who's looking at the route options and the weather and how it might be changing things, and can maybe go have a conversation with the captain about that. Okay, but this is something that you need somebody that's doing this navigator job. You need an engineer. You need who's ready to go and understand the mechanical and electrical equipment aboard the boat. Understand the hull integrity. Where's all the through holes? What might you do? Know where the fire extinguishers are. Can handle the basic level of maintenance and repair that you might need to encounter while you're underway, and knows where all the tools and spares are. You need a bosun, somebody that's going to take care of any repairs, mast, rigging, sails, spars, deck hardware, safety gear, etc. And then you need an emergency coordinator that's going to be the person that's going to make sure that in any kind of emergency that comes along, that somebody is making sure they know beforehand, where's all the abandoned ship equipment, where's all the man overboard equipment, where is all this stuff, and make sure that it gets used in the proper way when and if an emergency arrives. It's just nice to have these assignments. When I do this with a class, I post this thing. Excuse me. I have a copy of it. I just stick it up where with good old blue tape someplace down below, excuse me, in the galley area, so people can go by and look at it from time to time and remind themselves of what they're responsible for. Pardon me again. Then we need a watch schedule. I don't know how well you guys can see this watch schedule from your point of view. There's various and sundry ones of these watch schedules. And by the way, I'm happy to share a watch schedule with anybody, and you'll see my email at the end if you're looking for some of this, as well as my little cheat sheet on rules of the road. I'll be happy to share that with you as well. But you need a watch schedule. This is one I got from I guess from David Appleton, who was one of the instructors at the time, way belong when I did my ocean training, and it has all the different times of 0 to 300, 300 to 600, all the different time spans up here, and who's on the helm and who's on duty, and who prepares the meal, who cleans up the galley. It's very detailed watch schedule, but it really puts a lot of structure in place and organizes the crew for your passage. Make sure everything gets addressed. When you're on watch, then, what are the watch duties? When somebody's on watch, they're supposed to be maintaining the required course and speed. They clearly got to be looking for other vessels. They've got to monitor traffic for convergence, either using radar or hand-bearing compass, something to tell, are you actually converging with this traffic, or are they, and therefore you need to worry about them or not. They need to monitor sails and rigging. They'll have to do their logbook data. and do a safety check of the boat and get weather reports and log them in at whatever the agreed upon times are to do that. Log entry procedures. This is the list of log entry procedures that the school basically follows. Some variation of this, but this basically covers all these pieces. And they're, our average course and average wind speed and average wind direction, average boat speed, all of that is, there's average speed down here, is aimed at dead reckoning and for, the old-fashioned kind of navigation, just a dead reckoning as part of that. But, why do you need to record average wind speed? Well, you don't really, except that what really happens with a lot of these things that you end up recording every hour is, in my mind, it just makes you focus on what's going on around you, because you've got to write this stuff down at the end of the hour, so you need to be watching what's happening as the hour goes on, so that when you come to the end of the hour, you can write down there, okay, for the last hour, the winds have been averaging around 12 to 15 knots, and they've been out of the northeast. And if everybody does that, then you begin to see, okay, if the next hour they're changing, then you can start to understand what's happening with the weather. Is this what you expected, or is this something different than what you expected? It's just called being aware of your surroundings. And if for no other reason than that, I think I would strongly encourage you to have hourly log entries. And then standing orders. You need to notify you need to have everybody understand what the standing orders are about when do you notify the captain. These are your rules. If you're the captain on the boat, you can make them your own way. These are my rules. These are basically the school's rules as well. That I want to be notified no matter where I am down below sleeping, because I have to sleep too, if there's any traffic that's on a converging course. I don't care how far away it is. If it's on a converging course, somebody thinks it's on a converging course, come wake me up. If there's any traffic, even if it's not on a converging course, that we think is within 3 miles of us, I want to know about that. And how can you tell about 3 miles? Well, if I got radar, that's pretty easy to figure out, 3 miles. But if I don't have radar, there's a very simple way of doing that. If I look at the red and the green lights, they have typically a 3-mile visibility range. So if I see lights on the horizon and I can clearly see the red or the green, then I know I'm within 3 miles of that boat. So anyway, so I want to be waked up if that happens. I want to be notified if the barometer drops 5 millibars in an hour. Oh my God, I hope so. Any of these conditions is when you just need to lay it out here for the crew. When do you want somebody to come wake the captain up and say, and tell the captain, oh my God, bilge water level is increasing. Any kind of other rigging problems, can't hold the course. The navigator says we need to be on this course, and for the next hour, and then the navigator goes down and goes to sleep, and then for whatever reason the wind changes and you can't. It's impossible. Can't do that. Then you need to just come get somebody that knows what's going on. In this case, in my case, it's the captain. You might want to say that's the navigator. Doesn't matter. Somebody needs to be aware of it. And if you can't maintain boat speed, and this is another arbitrary thing, you decide what it is. But suppose the wind is so light you can't maintain 4 knots or 3 knots or whatever the agreed upon speed is. What do you do about it? And lastly, if there's anything else that you're in doubt about, you go wake up the captain. General safety rules. Kind of trivial, but they drive home the point. Keep the boat afloat. That means really you want to keep looking for leaks, and this is part of your hourly boat check of going down there and looking in the bilge to see if the bilge water is increasing. Stay on the boat. Use your harness. That's what that really says, is do not, just use your harness. My standing rule that my wife and I had, that I have on every class I have, is anytime you leave the cockpit for any reason, in any condition, no matter how calm and peaceful you think it is, you put on your harness and you go forward and do whatever you're going to do with your harness on. And at nighttime, even in the cockpit, same rule, no matter how peaceful and calm it is. When it is pitch black outside, you will wear your harness even when you're sitting in the cockpit. And then in bad conditions, as determined by the captain, you'll wear your harness when you're in the cockpit in the daytime. So anyway, if you just sail on the boat, we don't have to worry about man overboard maneuvers. And then lastly, don't start any fires. Be very, very careful with propane and the stove lighting and all of those kinds of things. Then we've got that set with the crew. We've got all these responsibilities assigned. We've got all the duties assigned. We've got the standing orders in place. All of that, everybody understands this part of the organization. Now we got to get everybody busy inspecting, because everybody wants to go. You want to have your entire crew go through your boat to know where things are, where they're stowed, where's the through holes, all the basic equipment. They want to have a basic level of knowledge about. You do not want to wait till the emergency arises and then have to go find out where the toolkit is stored, and where are the wooden plugs for the through holes. You want to know about all of that beforehand. So you need to have sufficient time in your preparation process is to allow this to happen. So basically, as I said, we check every nook and cranny. We usually send somebody up to the top of the mast. Excuse me a minute. And what are they doing up there? Well, they're basically just looking at the shivs, the pulleys up there at the top of the mast. Make sure they're look proper. They're not cracked or broken. That there's no chafe on the halyards that you haven't otherwise noticed. The main halyard, if you've got a traditional sail that you hoist up and down the mast, you can see the main halyard. But if you've got a roller furling main, and for sure you've got a roller furling Genoa, that's not a piece of gear you normally get to look at. So if you go up to the top of the mast, you can look at those halyards and all other parts of the rigging at the same time to make sure it all looks good. But again, you want to be just checking everything on the boat and getting everybody familiar with everything. If you've got a storm trysail, you want to do a test set of the storm trysail while you're calmly in port, so that everybody can see, what it looks like, where it fits, how it gets put in place, all of that part of it. So you don't wait till you're out in the 40-knot winds and the 15-foot waves before you have to have an instruction on how to set the storm trysail. And then we have to plan meals. And this is one of those that, yeah, of course you do, but it's again takes some planning. You want to have meals that you can keep it simple. You can have very, very good meals. You don't have to eat terrible food, but you have to understand that you're going to have to prepare this in a boat that's moving and is probably offshore, even in relatively calm weather, is going to be in 3 to 4 foot waves. So it's going to be rolling back and forth to some degree. So you want to keep it simple. You want to try to have as many one-pot meals as you can find. And that could be something that you might accumulate before the trip, is come up with recipes. I always challenge the crew to try to come to the class with some one-pot meals or recipes. They're simple to fix recipes that they're willing to try to prepare. It is really, really good to have one hot meal a day, particularly if the weather's not too great. It becomes a important part of keeping everybody's morale up. And one of the other captains had what we used to call the Golden Can Opener Award. He wants to just open cans, and you can do that and still have a nice meal. And then final navigation preparation. We've got to have established all of our courses. Again, where's all the ports, set whatever waypoints you're going to put into your GPS, get all your charts organized in proper sequence so you know where they are, make sure you know the departure arrival charts, all of this stuff laid out. The navigator has to know all about this, the captain has to know all about these, and the rest of the crew should as well know about them. You need to find the key lights. Look at the light list and find the really important lights that you're going to be looking for that are critical to you. Make sure you've got the current location. Make sure you've got the current sequence of the flashing sequence, etc. Excuse me. Look at navigation regulations. You've got from the Coast Pilot. You look on a chart, and we overlook this all the time. You look at your chart, and you've got this area on the chart that says, restricted area 334.102, and you go, what is that? And nobody knows. Well, you go look it up in the Coast Pilot, and it'll tell you exactly what that is. So it's a part of the navigator's job is to go try to look this stuff up before you get in there to find out that, oh my God, this is a target area, and that you want to for the jets that fly out of Patuxent Naval Air Base, and they use this for bombing practice. This is kind of important stuff to know. Review cruising guides for local knowledge, and set up your logbooks. Here's a typical scene with the navigator hard at work, with an audience all watching. But again, it's important for everybody when the navigator does this work, if at all possible, everybody should understand this. One person's doing it, but everybody needs to know what's going on. And then I said, file a float plan. Here's all the stuff that's going to be on that float plan. The kind of life raft, the crew names, point of contact, emergency point of contact, planned route. And what's not on this list is an agreed upon time for this person that you're leaving the float plan with, this reliable person here. When are they going to call the Coast Guard? Sounds like a pretty draconian thing, but you want that assurance that at some point somebody's going to actually call the Coast Guard. We did that on every passage we ever made. We always gave a time to our son, and as to if he doesn't hear from us by that time, he's going to call the Coast Guard. And of course he never did have to, but we always knew he could and would. Then final weather prior to departure. Make sure we've got all that we can. With the internet, we have the luxury, if we're sitting in port, of getting all the forecasts for all the area of the entire trip that we're getting ready to take, even though part of those forecasts, maybe 2-3 days in the future. We won't be able to do that once we leave port on most cases. Now, if we got a satellite communication systems, maybe we can do that. But if we're depending on VHF, you won't be able to get the forecast for some of the coastal areas until you are actually close to that forecast area. So you want to look at all the forecasts. If you're trying to use WeatherFax, and I didn't talk about that earlier, but that's another possible source for weather information. It usually requires a single sideband radio and your computer. But anyway, get your tropical storms. The WeatherFax you can look at online, by the way, without getting any systems. You can look at that online before you leave and at least get a picture in your mind of the weather systems and how they're moving, and maybe better understand the forecasts that are coming. But check tropical storms, and establish weather sources for use when you're underway. Again, we've done that beforehand, hopefully. So we finally spent day one, and we spend one full day with the class. We spend one full day in port doing all this work. And then finally, we are underway. It's almost like anticlimactic at this point, but we're finally leaving, and we finally have pretty blue skies and water, and we're a sailboat making like a sailboat, hopefully. And like I said, it's a good shakedown day. Everybody gets out there, gets to learn the boat, gets to make it go. And you're going to end it someplace with a nice dinner and a very restful night with all your work accomplished. Here we are approaching the C&D Canal. And here we are in the C&D Canal at the marina, tied up in a slip for the night. And then the next day, here's what we do. We take off, and we do this trip all in one fell swoop like I talked about earlier. Departure for Norfolk, ready at last. I say this, avoid analysis paralysis. You can't analyze yourself to death with weather conditions. About waiting for perfection. If the reverse problem of having a schedule and being forced to leave when conditions are not very good, the reverse problem is having good conditions and waiting for better. And that's what I'm talking about with this point right here. So you want to, you get all your work done, and you're confident you can, you're in charge, and the boat is ready and the crew is ready. Then you're ready, and you should be ready to leave. Final review of all your checklist, and be ready for this seasickness. If you've never done this before, be ready for seasickness. You ought to have taken your medication before you leave or sometime before to make sure you don't have an adverse reaction to this particular medication. And if you think you're going to get seasick, go ahead and take it before you leave. Be ready for different routines and continuous motion, because that's basically what defines offshore sailing. Then finally, we're going down the Delaware Bay. In this case, a nice motorboat day down the Delaware Bay. That happens too. As I said, sometimes there's no wind. Sometimes there's lots of wind. You never know what's going to bring. And sometimes it's kind of chilly out there. And then other times it's really peaceful and calm and nice and relaxing. And that's yours truly sitting there stretched out in the cockpit, sailing along. And now we're doing the underway routines. All this stuff we've been planning, all this preparing, right, finally starts coming together and paying off. Because we've got our watch system, we've got our procedures, our safety rules, our logbook, and our weather tracking. And here's just an example of a logbook. Now, a very quick aside, because I know I'm running, well, pretty much on time, but a little bit longer. A quick aside on logbooks. I took my ocean training with the school, and that's what I was taught, is to do these once-an-hour log entries. And finally, when I took off to go doing these on my own with my wife, the two of us, and I talked about this hourly thing, and we both thought, well, that seems a bit extreme. What are we going to do this thing every hour for? We don't need that. And so we said, we'll do it once a watch, right? Or once every 2 hours. I can't remember what we did. I think it was once a watch. Every time we changed watch, we'll do a log entry. And I think even before that passage was done, we were up to doing it once every 2 hours. And after a couple of passages, and it didn't take very long at all, we were back to once an hour. And it really was because of what I said earlier. It's a way to keep you focused on what's going on. And particularly when you're sailing shorthanded with just two of you, it's amazing. You're sitting back there in the cockpit. You're having a nice, peaceful sail, but it's dark. It's, the other person's down below sleeping. You're out there all by yourself, and you get to looking at your watch, thinking, "Is it time yet? Can I go do it yet? Is it time yet?" It's part of your routine. It's part of what keeps you going, and I'm a huge believer in keeping logbooks. And they're great fun to go look back at a later date when you're reflecting on the trip that you took and what the conditions were. You go find out what you wrote down. Sometimes it's not what you thought you remembered. Anyway, so we're monitoring traffic when we're offshore. And by the way, we do not ever hesitate to call these guys on the radio. They're almost always very helpful and very interested in talking to you. They're as concerned about where you're going as you are concerned about where they're going. So if you think you're going to be close, you just give them a radio call. Northbound ship buoys 53 coming up on the Chesapeake Bay. This is the sailing vessel Celestial off your port bow, and they'll pick you up in a moment. Anyway, call them on 13 when you're sailing in the bay inshore. Call them on 16 when you're offshore. And a hearty meal, as I said before, is always welcome. And finally, we get down here where we're going to be entering the Chesapeake Bay and the entrance at Norfolk. And that's one of the more stressful times of this trip, because you got buoys, you got traffic, you got everything. And particularly if you come in at night, it's going to be dark. You got all these various and sundry channels going on. And the thing that I always try to make sure everybody understands is 2-day passages are the worst in terms of being tired. The first day at sea, the first night at sea, you don't sleep too well. The second night at sea, you start sleeping a little better. But in this case, for this trip, the second night at sea, you're also coming into port. If you have a longer trip, the third night you start to catch up on the sleep that you didn't get the first night, and by the time, I always say, by the time you do 4 days, you can do it forever. But here you never get to that point, so you got to be very, very careful that everybody's very, very tired, and you got to be super on the alert. But finally you arrive, and again, here's a picture of when we arrived in the middle of the night, dark 30. to the marina at Norfolk. But then we get up the next day, we go take showers, and we do a lot of sleeping, and everybody's happy again, ready for Kodak moments and nice pictures. After we've rested, and then we're ready to do the next day back up the bay. This is about 135 miles back up the bay, so it's another overnight trip. And that's when people find out that the bay is actually more difficult to do at night than the ocean is. There's many more things to run into. There's lots of buoys out there to watch for. There's lots of shipping channels. There's lots of traffic. It's actually more difficult. But it's also more fun. There's more to see. A good sail up the bay, lots of lighthouses to go by. And then if you're fortunate enough to get the right conditions, we get to put the spinnaker up. On my last year, I did two 106 classes, one from Mystic down to Rock Hall, and one Delmarva following that. And for the Mystic to Rock Hall, I think I had the world's record 6-hour spinnaker run going down Long Island Sound the first day. And the second class, we had about 3 to 4 hours of a spinnaker run coming back up the bay, leaving Norfolk. That was excellent. It doesn't usually happen quite that nicely, but we usually try to get it in somewhere. In this case, we sailed into the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum at St. Michael's. Sometimes I go with the class to Annapolis. Either way it works. You get to St. Michael's, again, rest up again because you didn't sleep. You had another overnight. People are tired again. And go out to dinner someplace. Maybe next morning you get up a nice peaceful morning in St. Michael's on the bay. And nearing the end, and here we are going through Kent Narrows Bridge, and get to Rock Hall and have a nice celebratory dinner.